Season 2, Hammer of the Ancients Barbarian, HoTA is so incredibly powerful right now. It's one-shotting bosses, yes, all of the bosses, Duriel, Uber Lilith, even the world boss, and it's just really easy and fun to play even through Nightmare 100 dungeons, and it's just super duper smooth. This is actually one of the first builds where I kind of realized that we're doing almost too much damage, and I started just taking damage out of the build just so we can build up more survivability and more defenses just to have a smoother gameplay experience. In this video guide, we're going to go through everything that you need to get started and the endgame build setup, and it's just a super fun build that I highly recommend that you check out. To get started, you don't need any particular unique, and the one legendary power that you do need is findable on the codex, which is the Ancestral Force aspect, which just turns HoTA into a shockwave. Now when you're first starting off with like very little gear, I would not recommend using the key passive Unbridled Rage, and instead you can just switch over to Unconstrained, because we're really going to be focusing on berserking anyways in our build and getting into berserking and stacking up berserking damage, and Unconstrained is a really great key passive right now. Now the build really does start to take off in endgame once you get two uniques that are off of Varshan and Duriel. The first one is Ring of Red Fuhrer. This basically makes it so that as you're spamming Hammer of the Ancients, every other one is going to be a guaranteed crit. And then the second one here is Banished Lord Talisman. This is also insane because it gives us ranks of core skills and a whole bunch of other good stats. But most importantly, this is going to make it so that crits that also overpower do tremendously more damage. Now it also gives us the ability to guarantee an overpower. However, we have a few other ways in the build of guaranteeing overpowers. But this is basically the thing that's going to allow us to one-shot bosses, even the world boss. Now, another thing that really does kind of ramp up as you get better and better gear is damage while berserking, because it is the best stat in the game right now for barbarians because of the reworked Blood Rage, which makes it so that damage while berserking is now basically a multiplier to all of your damage. I have 89% more damage because I've stacked damage while berserking everywhere. We're also going to be getting damage reduction and fury generation from aggressive resistance and prolific fury, which just makes being berserk really, really good. Also, we're going to be using the Tusk Helm of Jords the Mighty. This is a great hat that gives us a lot of benefits, including whenever we gain berserking, we'll already berserk. We have a chance to become enraged, giving us even more damage, fury per second, and cooldown reduction. And this hat comes off of Duriel pretty frequently, and it was just absolutely just makes this build slap even more once you get your hands on this. Now, before we jump into the gear, let's talk about skills real quick. I'm just doing a basic setup with Lunging Strike and HoTA, the 3 Shouts, and Wrath of the Berserker. And we're just kind of going through the tree with like a very traditional kind of setup here, nothing particularly crazy. And we're just picking up some of the berserking stuff as well. And this little triangle of nodes here are really important. So this gives us more critical strike damage multiplicatively. This gives us more vulnerable damage multiplicatively. And this gives us multiplicative overpower damage. This 45% is kind of ridiculously high, and I would be surprised to see this nerfed down in the next season. But these 3 things give us quite a bit of damage. And then these 2 points here give us even more damage thanks to how HoTA works. I really like this particular setup, and if I was going to change anything, I would probably drop the Wrath of the Berserker and maybe go pick up Leap if I wanted to go travel faster. Maybe like add like Battle Fervor so that I could generate berserking from leaping onto enemies. But for the most part, this setup is really awesome. The weird thing though about using the 3 Shouts is that we're not actually going to be using any of these shout aspects on our gear. The legendary ring aspect that I have is the Unrelenting Fury aspect. And this makes it so that when you kill an enemy or you hit a boss with HoTA, it refunds a percentage of the base fury cost. And I found that this is just really awesome for just spamming HoTA as you go through the dungeon. And for the most part, you're not going to have to hit the boss too many times with HoTA. Probably if you just set it up, you can just kill them in one shot. And this is just way better than using the shout stuff. As we're going to the gear here, I'm doing one thing that's maybe a little bit controversial, which is using a legendary pair of pants with a lot of defensive mods on it and the aspect of disobedience over the Tybalt's Will pants. Tybalt's Will, really, really awesome. If you're doing lower level content, these will definitely just blow a whole bunch of stuff up. However, when doing like tier 100 nightmare dungeons, these are going to help you not explode. You're not really going to have a lot of defensive aspects on your gear with our current setup. The other defensive aspect I'm using is Aspect of Might. This makes it so that using our lunging strike gives you a period of damage reduction, which is just really good. And you can just swing at the air and this will trigger off. We're also trying to get our resistance capped by having resists on our chest armor and also on our boots. I'm also picking up damage reduction while injured, which is a really good stat here as well. And we're using gems in our accessories here to help cap our resists. Which gems that you need are probably going to vary depending on the resists that you have on your gear. But in terms of order of priority, I would say you really want to get your poison resist capped, your fire resist capped, and then third is your lightning res. These three things I think are the most scary and deadly in the game and have the most sources. And then you can get the shadow and cold res capped out as well. Now, if you're missing the Tusk Helm of Jords the Mighty, you're just going to a hat that has damage while berserking, armor, maximum fury, maybe some cooldown, and you pick another defensive aspect. On body armor, get resists, get damage reduction, aspect of might. On gloves, you're going to be looking for ranks the Hammer of the Ancients, overpower damage, attack speed, and strength. I'm using Edge Masters here to give us more damage. On pants, get a whole bunch of damage reduction. Armor is pretty important. And I want to get your armor up as much as possible. And then disobedience is really good. I'm using on my boots movement speed. I wish that these were the number of maximum evades, although attacks reduce evades cooldown aren't all that bad either. And we're using the Relentless Berserkers aspect. This just helps keep your berserking up a lot smoother. It just allows you to stay in berserking more, which just makes the whole build feel a lot smoother. Obviously, as I mentioned before, we're using Banished Lord's Talisman. We're using Ring of Red Fuhrer. And then on our other ring, the priority here, I think, is kind of getting life, damage while berserking, max fury, which I don't have, and then overpowered damage. These are definitely your core stats. You don't really need crit strike chance here. On your two-handed mace, the item power is really important. You want a high item power weapon. And then you're looking for things like damage while berserking, overpower damage, all stats, crit strike damage. This weapon is pretty nice. Now, on the other three weapons, you don't really care about item power all that much. You're really just looking for the same stats: damage while berserking, overpower damage, critical strike damage, and then like strength are all stats. I have enough all stats now that I can actually activate like my entire Paragon board. So, you can kind of keep that in mind as you're looking at different weapons. It is pretty important, though, that for your one-handed weapons, you're looking for maces because this gives you more overpower damage. This just gives you way bigger number than like swords give critical strike damage. And then your axe for your two-handed slashing. This gives you damage versus healthy enemies. For the most part, you're going to be killing enemies from being healthy all the way down to 0. And so, yeah, damage while healthy is just the biggest number. For weapon aspects, we're using Earth Strikers on our two-handed. This is just something that allows you to kind of swing weapons to get a guaranteed overpower. This is basically the thing that's going to allow you to very easily one-shot bosses. You don't actually need to use this particularly. You can just get something else that gives you damage. I just really like the ability to just go and just one-shot bosses, and we'll talk about that later in the video. Now, the other things we're doing is Berserk Ripping. This makes it so that while you're berserking, you're inflicting a bleed. You have a chance that bleeding enemies give you berserking. So this is just kind of a good way to keep the berserking up. Ancestral Force, we mentioned before. And then the other one is Limitless Rage. This is just the biggest multiplier that you can get. And it's really easy to cap this out basically all of the time. And so it's just the best thing to do. Last things for gems in your weapons, you want to be using rubies to give you more overpower damage. And then in my armor, I'm using amethysts. This just gives you damage taken over time reduction. I just kind of found that this helps deal with all of the crazy poison damage in dungeons right now. I'm not really sure why, but it seems kind of overtuned compared to everything else. When enemies have the ability to add a dot onto your character, it just seems to melt through my character. And having amethyst makes a big difference. Lastly, talking about Paragon, the glyphs that I'm using are Crusher, Dominate, Ire, Wrath, and Territorial. The Ire glyph is absolutely priority to get leveled up. This gives you more damage while berserking, and we're going to be slapping that directly into the Carnage board for 75 total strength. This is giving me 79% damage while berserking, which equates to basically 20% damage over here, which you can see. And this is just absolutely ridiculous. I like to go around and get a whole bunch of the damage while berserking nodes in here and pick up a lot of these life and other defenses and stuff. I really like the Warbringer legendary passive. This just gives us a good source of fortify. You can also get this from vampire powers as well from kills, but you don't really get the fortify back when you're fighting bosses. So bosses can die instantaneously, so we kind of have to figure out what's going to be best for Avatar of Zir once it comes out. Now, before we go, I want to show you how to do the one-shot boss setup. What I recommend doing is getting Tybalt's Will, equipping that. This just allows you to evade and fill up your Fury gauge. And what you want to do next is just get it up a little bit, and then you're going to Hammer of the Ancients twice. That's going to set up your Ring of Red Furor guaranteed crit. And the next thing we need to do is set up our weapon swap overpower guarantee. And the way that I do this is I just have Flay assigned to my two-handed slashing, and I just alternate between the two weapons. And it gets to this. And yeah, now we're set to go. We have a guaranteed overpower and a guaranteed crit. You want to make sure you don't left click here as you go up to your boss, but you just go walk right up. I like to activate Unstoppable, dash through, and bonk. There you go. Pretty simple. And then it's pretty easy to set up again here for the second part of Uber Lilith. We're just going to weapon swap back and forth. And we're pretty much good to go at this point. And there you go. That's basically how you do the one-shot combo. Hopefully this video helped you out. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm really hyped to see how Avatar of Zir will kind of be like changing the meta and maybe like with adjust the build a little bit more. Definitely keep an eye on the written guide. It is always the most up-to-date version of the guide. You can get that in the description down below. And just thank you so much for hanging out, and thank you to all the people that have come by the stream and said that like my guides and stuff have been really helpful this season. It really does mean the world to me. Hope you guys have a great one. We'll see you again soon.